Okay, so this is 58C on this topic of certain groups can seem wonderful at first and then, yeah, not so wonderful, which is why people leave, which is why these groups are obsessed with recruitment and looking good. But then the reality of the situation doesn't match up to all the hype. Another phrase, don't believe the hype. What I've put here is, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is, but why? Yeah. Now, when you look at the Bible, let's say we look at the Gospels, we look at the Bible, we look at the early church, seemed wonderful, didn't it? But it sort of tells you what you want to see, you know. And generally with literature or promotional material, they'll tell you all the positives and they'll leave out the negatives. Now, fair to the Bible, it doesn't not talk about Judas. It doesn't not talk about false prophets and false Christs. What I've put here, the Bible has something for everybody. And it's the same with cults. You're lonely, you could find a wife. You're lonely, you can find a social group. You've come off drink or drugs or whatever, you're starting afresh, here's a ready-made bunch of friends. You're looking for answers, spiritual meaning or purpose. It's a one-size-fits-all, isn't it? Cult. You know, the cult and the leader has answers for everything. It's basically confidence. I mean, I've heard a lot of leaders in cults speak with a great deal of confidence and they're very believable, but when you actually listen carefully to what they say, it's absolute nonsense. It just doesn't work in the real world. And there is an overlap between sort of the cult and the politics of the cult, you know, as if they've got all the answers, you know, and that why the cult leader should rule the world. I mean, you could say Trump's MAGA cult is a little bit like that. You know, they worship Trump, but they turn a blind eye to all the corruption. I mean, even yesterday, I saw this video of Trump and the crowds and, you know, young people, naive people, cheering him on, you know, and it's like, I'll say that again, cheering him on. And, you know, you think, well, hang on, what about all these bad things he's done? That they only see what they want to see. And it's the same with the Bible. You know, if you're ill, then Jesus will heal you. But does he? We still need hospitals. You know, we still need doctors and nurses. Where's the healing? Yeah, what I found, the deeper I dug into religion, the more fake it was. You know, prosperity gospel, but only for a few people. Healing, all fake. Where does the money go? They've spent it, you know. But the Bible has something for everybody. You know, oh, love one another. I like that idea, love one another. I'll become a Christian, you know. Or I like fellowship, I like the idea of heaven. And for some people, they more like the second coming Jesus. They like the war, the killing, the judgment, the revenge, sending people to hell. It's a book that has all the bases covered. You know, if you're a sort of what they call nammy-pammy sort of Christian, you know, oh, Jesus loves everybody. Yeah, you can choose your verses to make that true. Oh, Jesus never hurt anyone. Yeah, just ignore the book of Revelation. But then you could say, justifiably so, getting rid of all the wicked people. And the fact that one thing with religion you have to realise is that it's been around for thousands of years. And it's always promised this utopia, you know, and where's the utopia? You know, oh, well, you see, you have to blame the devil, you know. So is church achieving anything better than politics? You know, and at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to be, or religion. You know, you go to very religious nations, you'll see extreme poverty and extreme wealth. Well, hang on a minute. Why? You know, it's like people say religion is the answer, and oh, it would be so terrible if we didn't have religion. It just isn't reality. This is the thing. I mean, the natural way of being a human, you know, sort of humanist or naturalist, is probably far superior than religion. Being at harmony with nature, you know, kind of thing. Anyway, the thing about the Bible, where it has something for everyone, it contradicts. So one minute Jesus is this loving guy that heals people. Next minute he's threatening everyone with hell, and he's out to kill. You know, you can sort of pick it apart. Yes, he only kills the wicked people, and then define wicked as people who don't do what he wants. Then you're back to the cult leader mindset, aren't you? And the most bizarre thing I find with cults is none of them can even prove their God exists, or heaven or hell or the devil or any of it. You know, it's not a very good starting point to say there is a God and then not be able to prove it. It's not a very good starting point, is it? And I think a lot of people, we do see what we want to see in these groups. And some people, like my friend that I mentioned before, that got me into the cult in 2011, he's still there. He's still got his rose-coloured spectacles on. You know, he probably still thinks I'm the devil. You know, and you can't get through to him. He doesn't know how much the leaders make. He doesn't care. He's got his rose-coloured spectacles on. He sees what he wants to see. He's an old bloke and he still fantasises that, oh, he's going to get married. You know. Some people are just fantasists. They don't live in the real world. I've met quite a few of them in cults, including ex-members who, you know, some women I've met, you know, they're still in this fantasy world. You know, a lot of them into conspiracy theories as well. Because the world isn't perfect, then blame everyone but yourself, kind of thing. Conspiracy theories can be very cultic as well. You know, yeah, we need to get the message out, so give us your money, buy us our product, buy our product, you know, promote the truth, kind of thing. And they love this word truth, a lot of these cults, you know. I think that's it, isn't it? So the Bible does contradict. One minute Jesus is healing and loving, then he's killing and threatening. You know, it depends what you might be attracted to. Some people like the violent Jesus. Some people like the loving Jesus. Yeah, and some people will say, oh, well, you see, he does it because, you know, or they just ignore it, you know. What else is there to talk about? Recruitment events. Yeah, I've mentioned the marriage thing. Free food events. You'll notice that the free food comes after the sermon. The cult I mentioned, they did a sports day. But the sports day is after the brainwashing. Because most people realise, right, if I have the food, then people will leave. You know, and they won't go through the brainwashing session. So they do the brainwashing session, then you get your free food. It's like, there's even ones that, you know, do you want to come along to the cinema, watch a movie or something like that, but only after they've brainwashed you for an hour, you know, kind of thing. Which kind of, it's a bit of a devious way of doing things, isn't it? The Hare Krishnas do that. Free food, and then you just follow them around all day. You know, to be fair, they don't do as much brainwashing, but, you know, it's a bit devious, isn't it, to say free food, but you got to wait for it 6 hours or whatever. Yeah, and cults over thousands of years have come up with different ideologies and failed miserably. You know, even if you listen to sermons by people like Jim Jones or David Koresh or, you know, some of these other cults, there's a certain something to it that draws people in. You know, oh, let's make the world a better place. Equality. You know, no racism. Almost like a sort of communist ideal where everybody shares everything. But look how communism's worked out. They've got as many dodgy billionaires as capitalism. So there you go. So over thousands of years, cults have failed miserably. And normal society, you know, that can fail as well. You know, nations get taken over by dictators, or civilizations come and civilizations go. If the Egyptians had got it right, we'd all be building pyramids, wouldn't we? If the Romans had got it right, you know, if the Greeks had got it right, if all these philosophers had got it right. Well, clearly, one thing from history, you know, nobody gets it right, you know. We sort of muddle along, don't we? Muddle along. So there you go. That's video 58. Yeah, the cults, they do the sales pitch. They tell you everything you want to hear. They're friendly. But then you have to earn the friendship. Once you're not the new kid on the block and somebody else comes along, all the love will go on to the new person. Oh, I don't feel loved anymore. Yeah, what changed? Did you think you were always going to be the centre of attention? You know, it's quite amusing actually. Some people, I've known people in cults. They join for a month or two when you know the cult is doing the love bombing kind of thing, and then once the love bombing stops, then they'll just go off and find a different cult. You know, it's quite amusing actually in some regards, but there you go. It is what it is.